it's not. And you see the challenges. I have no idea how long we've been speaking about this for, but most people are not going to be interested in that long answer, and I completely get it.
Some
You
people
don't have to, yeah, but at the same time, you don't need to know all this to enjoy this
No,
whiskey.
no, no,
You know,
no.
when I was going to clubs, in France as a
You didn't care.
teenager,
Yeah.
I didn't need to know all that. I just enjoyed the
Yeah.
whiskey with a mixer, and
Yeah.
that's fine also.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Welcome to PreBatch. Today we're speaking with Ludo Ducrocq. Ludo is a seasoned whiskey ambassador, currently working for Whyte and Mackay, previously also Glenmorangie and William Grant & Sons. Today we speak about Scotch whisky production and all the stages and all the ingredients that go into Scotch and what that does to the final flavour of the whiskey. We speak about no-age statements and traditionally aged whiskey. We talk about chill filtration and bottling at cask strength. We deep dive on different kinds of wood, cask finishes, sherry finishes, different kinds of sherry, and seasoning casks, the difference between Scottish and European and American oaks, a lot more to do with the aging of Scotch whiskies. We also speak briefly about Japanese whiskey and other world whiskies. The drinks of the day are Whyte and Mackay blended Scotch, Dalmore 15, and a Dalmore 15 infused with raisin with a couple of dashes of orange bitters. Ludo, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I will have done a little intro before you came, but just tell the people what your current position is, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about your career.
Sure. So I work for a company called Whyte and Mackay. We make whiskey in Scotland, and I look after a couple of areas at Whyte and Mackay. The first one is our team of brand ambassadors. So we employ people who travel around the world to tell our stories. And the second area is our visitor centers. So we are open to the public at 3 of our distilleries. So I manage the team that looks after the visitor centers, and I set the strategy, I guess, for both areas.
Which are the distilleries?
So the ones that are open to the public are Jura, Fettercairn, and Dalmore is currently closed, but will be open soon. And then there's a fourth one, another malt distillery called Tamnavulin, which is not open to the public except during the Speyside Whisky Festival, which is in spring every year. And we have a fifth distillery, which is a single grain distillery called Invergordon, which is not open to the public, that one.
Okay. Yeah, I think, well, I for sure know Jura is on the Isle of Jura, right?
It is, yeah.
And then
off Isla.
Is Tamnavulin in Speyside?
Indeed, yes. That's the closest one to where I live.
Okay. And you live in?
So I live in a town called Elgin, which is in Speyside. So Speyside is where you'll find most of Scotland's distilleries. And this is where I've lived for the past 26 years now. Yep.
So how did you get into Scotch whisky then? Because you're French born.
Yeah, so I grew up in France, and France is the largest market in the world for Scotch whisky. So a lot of people drink Scotch there. My dad likes to drink whiskey, even today. So I guess I used to drink whiskey with friends, going clubbing, probably at an age that's probably too young to talk about.
And you're in the corner drinking Scotch.
Yes,
is that a normal thing in France?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I remember the clubs I used to go to. If you went there with a group of people, as part of the ticket to get in, you would be given a bottle of spirit and some mixers.
Wow.
And so you would choose the spirit and you would have the mixers for free. And often we chose whiskey. But my dad was really the person who introduced me to single malt in particular, and maybe helped me understand, the subtleties of the different types of whiskies. And then, of course, when I went to study in Scotland, if you're in Scotland, you have no choice but to engage with Scotch whisky. Every bar you go to has a wide selection of whiskey, and sooner or later the conversation turns to whiskey. And at one point, when I was speaking to friends at university about summer jobs and what we all intended to do in the summer, someone said, "Well, you like whiskey. Why don't you try and get a job at a distillery for the summer?" And it's not something that I had considered before, but I thought it was a good idea. I looked into it, applied to every distillery with a visitor center, and I got a reply back from Glenfiddich up in Dufftown.
Mhm.
So I started working as a tour guide there. And so that was immediately after university, and I absolutely loved it.
Mhm.
I think it's one thing when you enjoy consuming whiskey, but it's another thing when you start working in the industry, because then you start meeting all the different people who make the product. You start finding out more about the stories behind the different whiskeys. And I thought, what else would I do that would be better than working in this industry?
Yeah.
And I was quite fortunate because this was the year was 2000 when I started in the industry. And it was the beginning of companies employing ambassadors to travel around the world and tell the stories.
Yeah.
And so in our company there was only one person doing that job. He was very busy, so pretty quickly I was given the opportunity to travel to a few maybe not so important markets,
Mhm.
to essentially act as an ambassador. And I quickly became a full-time brand ambassador for Glenfiddich. Then I moved into Blended Whisky, and before you knew it, the company employed so many ambassadors that they needed someone to manage the ambassador program. So I became the head of the ambassadors there. And after 16 years with William Grant, great company,
Mhm.
I loved my time there. But I'd reached a point where I thought, well, either I stay there for my whole career, which wouldn't have been a bad thing,
Mhm.
or I try and do something different and see what it's like elsewhere.
Mhm.
And there was an opportunity to manage the ambassador program at the Glenmorangie company, so working on Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. So I took that opportunity. The timing wasn't great because that was just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it completely changed the way the industry worked,
Yeah.
especially in advocacy type roles, because we were living on planes, suitcases, traveling around the time, big events. So clearly, the pandemic completely changed that. Um, but I was there for just over 3 years, and then this opportunity to join Whyte and Mackay came up, and this is the sort of job that I've always wanted, because there are actually few roles in the industry that involve both brand ambassadors and visitor centers,
Mhm.
even though there are lots of synergies between both functions. So when the role came up and I got a phone call, I thought, well, I would have liked to stay with Glenmorangie for longer, but this opportunity was one I couldn't pass. So I joined Whyte and Mackay nearly 3 years ago now. Really good company. It reminds me a lot of William Grant in the early days when I joined the business. Uh, not a huge company, um, firmly Scottish as well, even though the owners are from the Philippines. The business is very much a Scottish business,
Yeah.
and very entrepreneurial with great whiskies. And so yeah, this is what I've been doing for the past nearly 3 years now.
Okay. Wow. So what is it about that sort of pairing of the ambassadorship and visitor centers that piques your interest so much?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, if you have to summarize what do brand ambassadors do, is that they take the distillery to people who can't travel to Scotland to see the distilleries.
Okay.
So from a storytelling perspective, um, from a skills perspective, there are a lot of synergies there. But also, I've always been quite entrepreneurial, and with the visitor centers, there's also a business side to the visitor centers, which I really enjoy. So managing the P&L and
Yeah.
trying to generate revenue from the experiences we deliver there
Yeah.
is something that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Okay. Because I suppose actually brand advocacy and brand ambassadorship is very sort of top level marketing, isn't it? You don't really see the end product. You certainly don't see a return on investment directly.
That's right. It
So
it depends on the roles and the companies, because the ambassador term now is used very, very broadly,
mm,
and it can mean so many different things to different companies. And all the roles that I mentioned now are all very important. So I'll mention them in no particular order. But for example, you can have an ambassador working at an airport promoting a range of whiskies to travelers, going from A to B. You can have ambassadors who focus on the on-trade, on the on-premise, so going from bar to bar, trying to build relationships with bartenders in order to get the bartenders to recommend their products. You have other ambassadors who maybe are ex-actors or celebrities in some cases who will be very comfortable on a live TV interview, talking about a range of topic, but also promoting the brand at the same time. So some of these roles can be commercial, but a lot of them are more about brand building and long-term brand building with no measurement around return on investment, at least not short-term. Whereas the visitor centers, in a way, do the same thing. At the end of the day, what we hope is that people who come to our distilleries will have an amazing experience, will love the whiskies that they get to taste at the distillery, and then they'll go home, they'll tell their friends, and they'll continue to enjoy our products for life. That's really, where the value is really for the distilleries. But at the same time, there's no reason why we can't provide amazing experiences at the distilleries that people are happy to pay for, and which can generate revenue, when they're on site with us.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I've decided to focus on advocacy type roles. When you work in whiskey, there's so many options. And if anybody's listening who's not sure what to do and has an interest in whiskey, I can't recommend more to get a job, any job really, in the whiskey industry. A tour guide role is probably one of the ones that opens most doors.
Yeah.
Because from there, yes, you can go into marketing, you can go in sales, but you can also go into production if you wanted to. You could become a master blender, you could become a distillery operator.
Are there examples of that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I know master blenders who started as tour guides.
Wow.
I know people who work in the legal team who started as tour guides as well. So yes, so it really opens the doors to whatever you want to do.
And the industry supports that sort of the educational, because obviously some of those roles, like becoming a master blender, certainly becoming part of legal or marketing, might require some further education.
Yes, I think the examples, certainly the legal team example I'm talking about, was someone who was studying law, who then took a summer job at a distillery and decided, I could do law for a whiskey distillery rather than become another type of solicitor, I guess. Most companies will encourage people to move functions as much as possible. I can't think of many examples where a distillery operator becomes a legal counsel. Without education.
30 years becoming a cooper is like maybe don't retrain as a lawyer. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, but I guess most companies would encourage that. And if you decide to go into marketing, then even within marketing, you have different options. You could go down the purely marketing route, where it's more about strategy and target consumers. You can go into the more creative side of things and look to developing TV ads. But I've never been interested in I like the strategy side of things, but the creative part that's more theoretical, I've never really enjoyed that, not too much anyway. Whereas the advocacy roles, for me, are the perfect balance of you do need a little bit of creativity. You need strategic thinking, especially if you start getting into leadership roles. But being able to get out of the office, being able to go to the markets, meeting bartenders, journalists, consumers, and organizing events and having that direct feedback, not necessarily financial, by the way. Return on investment, you talked about that. Yes, you can measure that financially, but having somebody who goes to a distillery or an event and says, what an amazing event, I learned so much, I love this particular experience, I'm going to tell all my friends about it, that's great feedback. That if you do a
brand
do a
loyalty
TV ad,
and exposure,
yeah,
to give them the corporate terms, but
that's right, but if you do a TV ad, I guess you could do some research afterwards to find the impact of the ad and so on, but it's not that human interaction which this role really facilitates.
Yeah, yeah, it's more top level. I mean, like a lot of marketeers now. You get the two camps, don't you? Like you get the marketeers that really want they want metrics on absolutely everything, which is why they love social media, because you can literally
Yes.
see how many people have seen it, how long did they watch the video, how many likes did it get, you know, how many comments, how many shares, how many saves. All of these things can be measured. Whereas the old school way of doing a TV ad, or even sending a brand ambassador to a bar to do an event, the event is for the same purpose, but you can't measure the impact apart from anecdotally. You can say, look, everyone had a great time, and I'm pretty sure they're all going to go out and buy whiskey or tell people about whiskey or something, you know. So it's
Absolutely.
measurable, but it's probably more valuable, or, you know, it depends on what you're doing. But
it depends on the life cycle of your brand as well. So I guess if you're very small, if you're starting up, first of all, the cost of going for a TV ad would be, well, impossible in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So whereas employing somebody to go from door to door to introduce the product, and there's this expression that we often use in different forms, liquid to lips, you know, getting people to actually taste your product. That is the very first step to somebody thinking, I really like this. I might buy it in the future. And so depending on the life cycle of your brand, you've got different ways that you can get consumers to at least consider you, and hopefully eventually purchase your brand and ultimately recommend you.
Yeah. What's the difference that you've noticed between like these three companies that you've worked for? What, like, in your opinion, not necessarily about the company, but what's their different sort of view or approach to ambassadorship that you've seen?
So I think if I have to be sort of black and white in how you can differentiate the roles, you can have a short-term view of the role, which is commercial. So go out there and sell, essentially, or build relationships. Get people to love your product, get them to understand your product, whoever that audience is. And then intuitively, businesses who take that longer term view know that it's the right thing to do. So between the three companies, there's been sort of degrees in between there, short term versus long term view. And then there are differences as well in terms of the audiences that the role will focus on. So in some instances, it's been more about the on-trade. In others, it's been more about the media, and nowadays influencers, you know, things like podcasts. When I started, it didn't exist. So that wasn't even considered. Whereas now, clearly, that's an area which can generate a lot of noise for your whiskey.
Yeah. What's your view on trade versus off trade? Because I think it's quite unique Scotch in that, you know, when bartenders talk about spirits, for example, you know, if I'm speaking to someone about mezcal, from my perspective, it's very highly on trade, because mezcal geeks are all bartenders, and people are getting exposed to those drinks through the bar. Whereas Scotch has this sort of dual character. There's, you know, it's bartenders love it. It's, you know, for a lot of bars, it's the only sort of spirit that they allow sort of on the back bar, apart from it, you know, because like a lot of cocktails will be pre-batched now, but like a lot of bars think, oh, I'm going to pre-batch all my cocktails, but you have to have a few scotches for the Scotch drinkers, you know, like you have to, like you can't avoid that. But then you've also got the whiskey enthusiast. So like, so how do you approach that? Is it different Scotches do? Obviously, different Scotches do much better on trade or off trade. Like, for example, I know Monkey Shoulder is a very on trade whiskey, whereas Glenfiddich, you know, I'm talking about the ones I know, might be a bit more of a, you know, sit in your games room at the end of a night and have a cigar and a whiskey or something like that.
Yes.
What is it like right now for you?
I mean, so there are different schools of thoughts really on the best approach, but a lot of that also depends on the company that makes the whiskey, because different companies will have different strengths. So I can give you my personal view on this, and I'm sure other people would disagree.
That's all we want is your personal view.
Probably mostly depending on the areas of competitive advantage of their organizations, I guess. The on-premise, for me, the on-trade is absolutely key in this category for a number of reasons. First of all, Scotch has a huge number of options. So if you go to a whiskey bar, if you go to a whiskey shop, there are hundreds of whiskies to choose from. So it's quite a complex category. It's also a category that's quite scary for somebody who might not have too much knowledge or too much confidence, because you have to be brave to go into a whiskey bar in Glasgow and to say, I'm going to order this one, because someone will listen to your choice and will have an opinion on your choice. So you need to be prepared for that. And then there's the risk in terms of cost. So whiskey is expensive, especially single malt whiskey. So if you go into a whiskey retailer and you have to buy a whole bottle, if you don't like it, then you've spent, £50, £100, £500 on a bottle of whiskey. And what do you do? It's at home, you've spent the money, and you might not like it. So for me, the on-premise is really important in that sense. It's a great place to try different whiskies, but it's also the best place to get recommendations, because most bartenders now are very familiar with all the different spirits behind their bars. They're very familiar with Scotch whisky as well. So it's the best place to go in. I've been doing this all my career, and I still go into bar and I ask, did that in Auburn very recently, which whiskey would you recommend? And it's always interesting to listen to the bartender's perspective. And on that occasion, I was given a Campbellton whiskey that was really, really nice. So
And I suppose the on trade, if you can give information to a bartender about what you're doing, that information is amplified through all the customers that they see. Whereas if you're focusing on trade, maybe they tell a few friends, but for all intents and purposes, you basically you're selling to one person. I don't want to say selling, but you're sort of
I saw some research actually in America that said that on average a professional bartender recommends 5 single malt whiskies per day. So
you want to be one of those 5.
Ideally, yes.
But that's I mean, it's a good statistic anyway for whiskey, because I know the whiskey community are fairly include everyone I've spoken to. They care about the category as a whole. They're a very sort of high tide raises all ships mentality, whereas it's much better for the whole industry to succeed, not one at the expense of another. So that's what I always find.
Absolutely. I think it's talking about whiskey. That's good timing.
Hello.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So can't remember what you said now, Gavin.
I said something about it being a tight-knit community.
Yes,
because people drink with each other. I know, like, especially in Speyside, where there's hundreds of distilleries in quite a small area. I'm sure you go to a bar and there's multiple workers from multiple different distilleries. They all drink with each other, and
it's one of the first things when I host people, particularly in Speyside, who will come from. Often what happens is in the market, things get a little bit more competitive, especially compared to the producers, at the distilleries in Speyside. One of the first things that I say is, we need to be respectful, because let's face it, nobody goes to work in the morning at any distillery and says, today I'm going to be as rubbish as I can be. I'm going to do as bad a job as I can. Everybody gets up trying their best. Some depending on opinions, might do a better job than others, but everybody's trying their best. And when you're in Speyside, if you have a conversation about whiskey, the good chance is someone next to you works at another distillery. And
it's a big part of the industry in Speyside, right? The big part of the global what is the word? The economy in that area.
Right. Completely, I play football with, I used to play, if I'm honest with myself now.
Let's just say we'll edit that bit out so it makes...
Used to play with not just other distillers, but coopers, coppersmiths. There's a whole supply chain, around the industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's have a wee dram.
Yes.
Yes.
Cheers.
Did I say that right?
Yeah. Cheers.
So what are we drinking here?
So yeah, on that note about the whole industry, and this is maybe a little bit cliche, and it's something that used to annoy me when I worked as an ambassador on blended whiskey. Most of the interviews that I gave when I worked on that brand were about, most people prefer to talk about single malt whiskies, but let's talk about blends this time.
Mm.
Especially in people in the know, there's always this perception that it's more interesting to talk about single malt. And it is frustrating, something that I find frustrating. So I wanted to start with a blended whiskey.
Yeah.
And so this is one of ours. It's the Whyte and Mackay blend. I'll let you enjoy it. So I wanted to start with this whiskey because it's a company name as well. So it's incredibly important to us as a company. And so this whiskey was first blended in the 19th century. And the challenge that you have with blends is it's difficult to tell the story of the blends compared to the single malts in particular. People nowadays, maybe it's always been the case, like short answers. Things that you can easily remember and pass on. So, for example, how old
Not
is
in
this
this
whiskey?
podcast.
Okay.
Give
Okay.
as long answer as you want. This is the
I could
place.
bore people to death with this,
of
but
course.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the age of the whiskey is something that people want to know because they use this as a reference point for how much should I spend on it? Is it going to be good? Older is better, is often what people think. And that's definitely not always the case.
Yeah.
It very much depends on the occasion. It depends on how you're going to drink the whiskey. Are you going to enjoy it on ice with water? This one I would recommend adding a drop of water, actually.
Yeah.
It brings out the fruit notes. And so with blends, often there is no age statement. So what you know for a fact is if there's no age statement on the bottle and it's a Scotch whiskey, you know that it's at least 3 years old. If we sell this in the US, you know that it's at least 4 years old because we have to adapt to the local legislation for some reason.
So that's all Scotch in the US. I didn't know that actually.
So no, you can't sell it if it's younger than 4, but you have to put the age statement on the bottle then. So what you'll find is often it will say matured for 36 months is what it says if it's less than 4 years.
All right.
But most brands will ensure that the whiskey is at least 4 years, and in most instances blends are older than 3 years. It's not because there's no age statement that we should assume that they are just 3 years old. So this whiskey will have whiskies matured for different years, and it contains both single grain and single malt whiskey. And there's another challenge, the word single grain, and the difficulty of simply explaining what single grain whiskey is and why it's not inferior to single malt whiskey.
Maybe we can explain quickly because I'm sure not everybody knows, because those words mean specific things. Single grain, single malt.
That's right.
Tell you like something about what's in there. So maybe we can start with just specifying what the difference is, what those things mean.
Yeah. So single in both cases means one distillery.
Yeah.
So distilled at just one place. And then you have the difference between grain whiskey and malt whiskey. Malt whiskey, very simply, and another reason why malt whiskey is so successful, you can explain it simply, is 100% malted barley, and it has to be distilled in copper pot stills.
Yeah.
Grain whiskey in Scotland always has to have a little bit of malted barley, and it also contains other cereals. That's another challenge immediately. What are these other cereals? You don't always know.
Other is vague.
Yes. So in most instances, we're talking about wheat. It could be maize as well, depending on the distillery or when the whiskey was distilled. So at Invergordon, which is our own single grain distillery, for a period of time we use wheat. For another period of time we use maize. We're currently using wheat. So if you don't know the age of the whiskey that's gone into the blend, you can't really work out, well, was it made from wheat or from maize? So that's another challenge. The other main point of difference is the distillation process. Grain whiskey is distilled continuously in column stills. These are very complex pieces of equipment. which often are associated with, again, because people like to take shortcuts, with inferior. Because it's that perception where I don't really understand it, so it's just easier for me to think it's not.
It seems industrial, grand
completely.
scale.
Absolutely,
less
it's industrial.
quaint.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's also cheaper to run than a pot still. So it means that the output costs less to produce than whiskey distilled in a pot still. But it's important not to associate price with flavor and enjoyment. Single grain whiskey tends to be lighter. Some of them will be full of banana notes or pear notes. It matures more quickly in a cask as well, which is another reason why blends can be bottled at a younger age. The grain whiskey will extract more flavor from the wood, and after distillation, it's already you could enjoy it immediately after distillation if you wanted to. So it doesn't need sort of 10 years, 20 years of maturation to reach the type of aromas that you would want in a single malt.
Why
example.
is that?
So the distillation process only allows the lighter types of aromas to go through the column stills. And the resulting spirit is distilled up to a much higher strength. So usually it's distilled around 94%. So the maximum limit for Scotch whisky is 94.8%. So most distilleries in Scotland that produce single grain whiskey, there are exceptions of course, will go up to 94.6, 94.7%. So at that sort of strength, you already have something that's very soft, very. Of course, if you reduce it with water,
doesn't sound soft, but yeah,
no. But if you reduced it, if you reduced a new make spirit from a malt distillery down to 40%, and you compared it to a single grain whiskey reduced down to 40%, the malt would be a lot more intense than the single grain whiskey, which is actually the reason why, or what led to the birth of blended whiskey. So column distillation started in the 1830s in Scotland. And shortly after that, Andrew Usher, who's credited with being the first blender, thought, well, I've got these, especially in those years, 19th century, I've got these single malt whiskies, maybe not even matured for 3 years back then, that are very, very, very intense. And then I have this new single grain whiskey that is much more approachable. What happens if I start blending these whiskies together and create something that maybe will be better than the sum of would be better than the parts? And so that's how blended whiskey was born. But when you put all these things together, really difficult to explain column distillation simply. It's a fact that single grain spirit will be cheaper than single malt spirit. The fact that you don't really know what whiskies are in there as well, I haven't touched on that, but this whiskey will contain a number of Highland and Speyside whiskies married together with single grain whiskies. But the recipe, if I can call it a recipe, will change. So that's why we employ a master blender who select the different whiskies in order to achieve a consistent taste profile. But I can't exactly say to you which whiskies are in there. And nowadays, provenance is so important. People want to know not just where what they're consuming was made, but who made it, what's the name of their pet, that kind of stuff. So so with blends, it's with blends you have to reframe the conversation. This is about a quality spirit that you can mix if you want to. You can consume it on ice, maybe more suitable as a pre-dinner drink than an after-dinner drink, maybe better suited in a cocktail than, for example, a smoky single malt. So
certainly easier to balance with other flavors than than something heavy and oily or smoky or highly complex.
So it's not because this product is much cheaper than the one we're going to be drinking after that, that it's an inferior product. I think that's the message that, that I want to convey, because actually it's important to remember as well that the main part of this whiskey industry is blended whiskey. The vast majority of Scotch whisky sold around the world is blended whiskey, not single malt whiskies. But single malt whiskies tend to get the spotlight. They're amazing too. We're going to talk about them. But let's not talk about single malt whiskey being amazing to the detriment of blended whiskey, because that's just the wrong kind of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think yeah, I think my view on it for what it matters. Yeah, I was going to try and do that myself, put a little bit of water in there, but I didn't trust these glasses.
I didn't make a mess. Look at that.
You did it? I don't. All right, let's try. Let's see if I'm
It's
as
a
good as you.
competition now.
I didn't want to do it. There we go. Yeah, I drink Scotch always with a touch of water. Not always, but nearly always with a touch of water. I think it's so nice. We can get into that in a second, actually,
Yes.
because I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, which I think is what you actually taught me a long time ago, that it's perfectly acceptable to put water in your whiskey in
Yes.
Scotland, and I took that and I've run with it for maybe a decade now. So
Great,
thank you for
good.
that.
That's good. Yeah, I mean that's a personal opinion. I'm sure, you know, if you do that somewhere, someone will say, "What are you doing?" Especially
If they're doing it in whiskey bars in Glasgow and they
Yeah.
have special little jugs
yeah,
specifically for adding water to whiskey, I'm counting it as perfectly fine
Yeah.
anywhere else in the world.
that's right.
Yeah.
But not the amount of water that we added there. I think
No.
if anybody saw us do that, you know, someone would have an opinion.
Yeah, well, it's a conical glass that's
Yeah.
not very easy to pour from.
But I think you know, there's a lot of people who drink a small amount of whiskey with a lot of water, actually. And if you think about whiskey highballs, for example, in Japan,
Yeah.
you know, it's a very popular way of enjoying whiskey as well. It doesn't have to be, you know, by the fire.
No, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, at my bar we have a whiskey highball tap that all we serve is pre-batched whiskey kegs. We make our own seasonal cocktails with Suntory. It's not Scotch, but it's, you know, as close as you get
Yeah.
without being Scotch.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's literally just seasonal changes, and they're all whiskey sodas basically, just with slight herbal changes. And
Nice.
they're great. People love them.
That sounds
You
great.
know, you get that freshness, but you get a little bit of warmth as well. You know, you get that Scotch sort of hint.
Yeah.
So it's like being by the fire, but also at the beach at the same time or something. It's
Yes,
nice.
that's right.
Good.
And sorry, it's funny you should mention Japanese whiskies, because when it comes to Japanese blended whiskies, there's no prejudice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a
also-
whole
yeah.
that's a whole new world.
But for some reason, with Scotch blended whiskies, they can be prejudiced. Not everybody has those comments, by the way.
But is Japanese blended whiskey also that same blend of column stilled and pot stilled, and is it the same malted barley for pot and other grains for column?
Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole industry, you know, started in the 20th century, and a lot of the inspiration came from Scotland when the first distillery was established there in 1923. And the point of difference, though, with Japanese whiskey is that, unlike Scotland, and this is another point that goes back to what you said about everybody working together, the whiskies in this glass are not all from Whyte and Mackay. We work with as many different producers as we can. The more variety of flavors we have in casks, you know, at the distillery, the easier it is for our master blender to select the different whiskies and create the blend. In Japan, however, there are fewer distilleries, and especially for a long time, there were essentially two companies that were more competitive, I guess, than the producers in Scotland. So most distilleries in Japan are set up to produce different styles of whiskey at one distillery, so that they can then create in-house blends, if you like.
Yeah, so they can kind of mimic the hundreds of distilleries that you've got in Speyside, but within the reach of themselves, because they only had a couple of distilleries.
That's
maybe you could explain just you know, because maybe we skipped over the part, and maybe some people don't realize what actually goes into a blend. So, like, for example, you've got Whyte and Mackay here, which is a blender. Is there a Whyte and Mackay distillery, or is the distilleries are called different names?
Right. Yeah. So the company, was set up by two gentlemen, actually, called Allen and Pointer, not Whyte and Mackay. So it's just a
They didn't like their own names.
So no. So initially, the business was set up in Glasgow, and it involved more than just whiskey. And John Whyte and Charles Mackay joined that business. And when the owner of the business passed away in 1881, that's when Whyte and Mackay was born. So James Whyte and Charles Mackay took over the business
Mm-hmm.
and started to focus on whiskey. So the blend here was probably born in 1882 when a warehouse was built with vatting facilities and blending facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, so the business, I remember your question now, the business was established back then, and Whyte and Mackay didn't acquire a distillery until they bought the Dalmore distillery in 1960.
Mm-hmm.
After that, in 1973, Whyte and Mackay bought Filtration distillery,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the early 1990s when Whyte and Mackay bought a company called Invergordon Distillers, which owned the single grain distillery called Invergordon, and also Jura Distillery and Tamnavulin Distillery. So that's how the distilleries came into the company.
Mm-hmm.
So the short answer is the company is called Whyte and Mackay, the blend is called Whyte and Mackay, and there are 5 distilleries that have got different names that go into the blend alongside many other distilleries from Scotland.
Yeah, which is a fairly typical model, right?
Yes.
That's not unique to Whyte and Mackay. Some of the biggest Scotch blends that we know don't have a distillery with that same name and started off as blenders. Some just as whiskey shops or
correct.
You know,
The early blenders, Johnny Walker is probably the most famous one.
Yeah.
Started as grocers who started blending their own whiskies, to sell in their shop, and
Yeah.
those whiskies evolved into very successful names that are recognized all around the world now.
Yeah, yeah. And
So-
now we see the sort of the more mature version of that in some sort of unique bottlers, like I think is it Compass Box.
That's right.
And is a Whiskey Exchange one of them, or is that just a website? I'm making that up, maybe.
They probably have their
Compass
own blend
Box
as
is
well,
one I
but yes,
think I
yes. So
remember, but
yeah, a few independent bottlers make their own blends as well, and another reason why we all work together is because it makes it easier to manage stock, because no matter which type of whiskey you're talking about, it always has to be aged for at least 3 years, often longer, and so we're supposed to predict the demand, decades in the future in some instances. So being able to rely on your neighbors for a supply of whiskey, if you're running out of the whiskies that you normally use, it's really helpful. It means that you can continue to create your whiskey.
Yeah, yeah. So what's that like? Like I don't know how much you get involved with that side of it, but I'm fairly interested in like how does the trades take place? So like for yourself, like you've got a few distilleries, so you can kind of cater yourself. Like as I understand it, the master blender will say, okay, we need some heavy oily, we need a little bit of Scotch, we need some floral. We're gonna get this from the Dalmore, we're gonna get this from Jura, we're gonna get this from here. That's gonna make up 80% of it. And then, we need some really peaty stuff, or we need some really, like salty stuff. So we're going to go and tap up Oban for some.
Yeah.
So how does that part of the trade work? Does someone make a phone call and say, I need a couple of barrels of this? Or
so it's an interesting process, and quite different from how a consumer or a bartender would see the whiskies on the shelf, where the main criteria will be flavor. So a master blender will typically organize all the different whiskies from Scotland in different styles, and then loosely create a recipe based on those styles. So I need 10% of style A, 5% of style B. Now this is a loose recipe.
Yeah.
And for each style, you'll have a number of distillery names. And so when creating a blend, a master blender is able to look at what stock is available and select the whiskies, put the whiskies together, see what the flavor is like, see if it's as expected, and then tweak it as needed to get a consistent taste. So based on that, you can have a model for how much you need of each distillery in your warehouses. And so that if 1 year it becomes more difficult to acquire a particular distillery, maybe because another blender really wants it as well and is prepared to pay more than you for it, or because that whiskey is suddenly becoming more popular as a single malt and the producer is deciding to keep stock to sell as single malt rather than to blenders, then you go to the next name down the list, and you ensure that you have enough stock, a bit like your kitchen, making sure that it's fully stocked so that you can create the meals that you want to create.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say this sounds very much like how I make ramen. I have a rough idea of what I put in the pot, and then I taste, and then you add the last few bits because roughly you're going to get this base. So and that can change year on year what products people are using. So,
that's right.
So a blend is always going to be the same flavor. That's the job of the master blender, but the recipe can change from year to year.
Correct. Yes. I mean, going back to the point that I think we started making this in 1882. A lot of the distilleries that were around back then are no longer here. Equally, there are new distilleries. So it would be impossible to use we couldn't make Whyte and Mackay today if we were trying to use the same whiskies that were first used. And that happens every year. The trend over the past few years has been more about distilleries opening and reopening rather than distilleries closing. But the industry has had ups and downs, and so some of the whiskies that have been used in blends over the years are no longer there. And one, I'm just getting the aftertaste here. There's another step in this whiskey, which is that the whiskey is finished in sherry casks. So it's like this triple maturation process that we often talk about. So that's an additional step that Whyte and Mackay chooses to do, which other blenders might have different views on what works for their whiskies. But this whiskey is also finished in sherry casks, so you get a little bit of dried fruits coming through here.
Yeah, so tell me how like the timeline works then. So like let me sort of map it out as I understand it. So you'll have some grain whiskies and some malt whiskies.
Correct.
They'll be distilled in column and pot stills respectively. Then they'll be aged independently. They'll be aged on their own.
Correct.
Then do you get the single cask barrels essentially? Do you take, they don't get blended before they come to, like you don't get a single malt blend.
No.
You get the single casks, right? Essentially. You're buying full barrels of Scotch before they're blended.
Short answer, yes.
Short answer, yes.
Long answer is sometimes you might get from producers who are trying to avoid for their single malts to be available through independent bottlers. They might add what's called a teaspoon of another whiskey to a cask of a particular single malt or a particular single grain. So that way you're not getting a cask of a famous whiskey name. You're getting another name. It's a blended malt or a blended grain, but from a taste perspective it almost makes no difference. And you're correct, the whiskies are matured separately. In our case, they're married together. They go into sherry casks for a period of time, and then they go into bottles. Obviously there's filtration in between. Water's added as well.
So you buy them, blend them, and then finish it in sherry casks. Does it get blended again after that, or that's it when it's finished?
It goes into a bigger vat, so it's kind of blended again before.
Mellowed,
Well, it's because just logistically it has to go into a big vat before it goes through the bottling plant.
But not to adjust the recipe, only to let it, to give it somewhere to be.
And often most blenders will acquire new make spirit, which will go into their casks. It will be matured in their warehouses, but you can also buy mature whiskey casks from companies if you find that you're short of a particular type.
So complicated then. No, but I think it's interesting for people to understand the complexities of all of that, because when you say I've matured for 3 years, it's not actually that simple when you think about it.
It really isn't.
At what point is it matured for 3 years?
All
together, separately, both,
It's not, and you see the challenges. I have no idea how long we've been speaking about this for, but most people are not going to be interested in that long answer, and I completely get it.
Some people
don't have to, but at the same time, you don't need to know all this to enjoy this.
No.
When I was going to clubs, in France as a teenager, I didn't need to know all that. I just enjoyed the whiskey with a mixer, and that's fine also.
So we've got so this is like, I think we've mapped out blended whiskey quite well, and the two constituent parts are obviously grain and malt whiskies. Maybe before we get our malt whiskey, can we touch on single grain whiskies and like how they end up in bottles sometimes. So I like like
Yeah.
the ones that do end up in bottles, which I know is fairly few and far between.
It's a very small category. We have a single grain whiskey out there called Invergordon, of course, which is available in the US only at the moment. Other producers also bottle their single grain as single grain. Independent bottlers also bottle single grain whiskies. So you can find them, and very simply, it's a bit like a single malt. So it's been made at one distillery, except it's from a variety of cereals, and doesn't have to be distilled in column stills. It could be distilled in pot stills, but most of them are distilled in column stills. So the extra step as well, if you're familiar with the malt whiskey making process, where barley is malted and then the malted barley is ground and mashed with hot water before fermentation. Single grain has one additional step, which is called cooking, which is where the other cereal is cooked before being mixed with ground malted barley and water.
Okay.
And the reason for that is simply to open up the grain to give the enzymes in the malted barley access to the starch in the other cereal in order to convert the starch into sugar.
Yeah,
So
because malted barley would have already gone through the malting process, so it doesn't need to be cooked in the same way as the hard, dry grains would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the difference between American whiskey and Scotch whiskey. We can only use natural enzymes, or indeed Irish whiskey as well, where in Ireland, in America, they are allowed to use artificial enzymes. So that's why in the definition of Scotch whisky, it says that you always have to use some malted barley in the recipe.
Yeah.
So you have to use the natural enzymes in the malted barley, and it means that the barley varieties that are used for grain production are different compared to the ones used in malt production. We choose varieties that have a higher enzyme content than for malt production.
Yeah. Okay. And as I understand it, malted barley is key. Even when you're using other cereals, malted barley is key for the fermentation process, right? Like it would be difficult or near impossible to ferment maize or wheat without the help of malted barley and the enzymes within them.
Yes, or artificial enzymes, but you need something to convert the starch into fermentable sugars. Yeah.
Yeah, and corn and wheat don't do that on their own. Even if you soften them, you can't malt corn.
I don't think you can.
You get popcorn.
I don't think you can. I think you can malt wheat, but I don't think it's as successful as the process of cooking and adding enzymes.
Yeah, malted wheat doesn't roll off the tongue in the same way as malted barley.
Yeah, you can probably get it, but you also need to think about efficiency here, and it's probably not I wouldn't say it's a dirty word, but it's not something that people want to think about. But it is important from an environment perspective to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of the processes in Scotland have evolved over the years to ensure that we don't waste natural resources. And so things like barley varieties, over the years, these varieties are bred in order to ensure that we can extract either as many enzymes as possible or as much starch as possible per acre of land, if you like, so that we don't waste farmland and resources.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think that's a good jumping off point, I think, to get into the process of whiskey making, because we're talking about malting already, which is the first step pretty much. So maybe we can just talk about the steps of making whiskey, and if we can get a bit nerdy on each one as we go. So if I can start us off on barley and cereals, so I imagine this is if we take it back even before production, we have to grow some cereals and procure them. I guess I suppose most distillers don't grow their own cereals, they buy them from somewhere.
Yes, correct. Yes, so barley can come from anywhere really. It doesn't have to come from Scotland. Obviously you're trying to use as much local barley as you can, so we have a distillery in the northeast of Scotland called Filtration, where we source all the barley that we need for that distillery from within 50 miles.
Okay.
And we set up a club called the F200, the Fetekern 200 Club. And this is a collective of 200 farmers plus a grain broker that acts between the farmers and the maltster, a company called Baird's. So this club ensures that we have enough quality malted barley from within 50 miles to supply Fetekern distillery.
Okay.
But like I said, it's something that we do because it makes sense to stay as local as possible. Also, Fetekern is in this part of Scotland that we call the Garden of Scotland. Lots of farms there. One of my first jobs in Scotland was picking strawberries in a farm near there. So the land there is very fertile, really ideal for barley production. So it wouldn't make sense for us to go to European countries, to get barley in.
Yeah. Is there much difference in quality of barley or other cereals? Do you taste any terroir in the final product? Does anything come through?
Gosh, that is debatable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so the reason why it's debatable is because the answer is probably yes and no. In the sense that if you did lab trials, lab scales in a really controlled environment, you might be able to demonstrate using chemical analysis that a particular variety of barley maybe produces more esters or whatever. I'm making this up, but maybe you could demonstrate that it creates a different taste profile as far as the gas chromatographer that would be used for the analysis is concerned.
Yeah.
But then you need to think about the distillery environment and everything else that happens.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, the scale is much bigger. Even a very small distillery will be far bigger than a lab scale distillery. And there's so many other things that have an impact on character as well. Or you're going to dry the barley with peat, because if you do that, there'll be lots of phenols in the cereal. The whiskey will be very, very smoky. Would then the human nose be able to tell the difference between two varieties of barley? And when you add maturation, distillation, yeast, all that stuff, it's so the short answer is distilleries are more interested in, so it's not so much the distilleries actually initially, but the maltsters will work with labs that will breed varieties of barley with a view to ensuring that the new varieties are disease resistant, that they grow well in the conditions where the cereals are going to be planted. So even around Fetekern, which is near the coast, there's a difference between the fields that are near the coast and the ones that are more inland. The ones near the coast are more sandy. And so certain barley varieties grow better in those conditions than others. And then you don't want the barley to grow too tall, because when it gets windy, you don't want the stems to break, and then you can't harvest the cereal. So these are really the things that they think about. How much am I going to be able to get per acre? How much is going to get ruined by wind or disease? And then how much starch, in the case of malt whiskey, how much starch can I get into each grain so that when we send that to the distillery, we can extract as much sugar and we can extract as much alcohol as we can from it. That's really the main concern.
Yeah, there's more yield than
more
flavor.
Yields. Yeah, absolutely, because of the point I made here.
So let's go to the other two ingredients then. As far maybe there's some nuance to everything as there is, but the other two would be yeast and water that we add. So let's start with water then. How important is water to?
So water is important in a way, maybe less so than what you might read in whiskey books. Water is certainly important in terms of the location of the distillery. So you need so much water to make whiskey. If you're going to start your own distillery somewhere, the first thing you want to do is find a source of clean water in abundance, because you're going to need a lot of water. This 60% of what is in here is water. So you need a huge amount of water. Then the pH level of the water will have an impact on how the yeast behaves during fermentation. Now, this impact will be small, but in theory, it's true that, if the water is soft, the yeast works under better conditions. If the water's hard, then the yeast is slightly more stressed and it might create different flavors. all of these are small differences. The three things really that make a big difference to flavor are, first of all, the decision to dry the barley at the end of the malting process using peat or hot air.
Mm-hmm.
If you use hot air, you create something more like this: soft, sweet, fruity, rich, elegant. If you burn peat, you get a lot of smoke, and you get not just smoke, but also earthy notes, leafy notes, forest notes in a cereal, which you then get even after 50 years of maturation.
Yeah.
Distillation is probably the next most important phase, whether you use a column still or a pot still, but even between different stills, there are differences. The theory is, it goes back to what I talked about when I explained column distillation earlier. The idea is that the taller a still, the lighter the spirit will be, the more elegant, the more fruity it will be. The shorter a still, the heavier the spirit will be. And that's really all to do with interaction with copper and the amount of reflux that you get inside a still.
Yeah.
So the theory goes that when you put beer inside a still, you heat it up, the vapors rise to the top of the still, they follow the line arm, they go into a condenser, and then the vapors are condensed back into liquid. On that journey, though, because it's always colder on the outside of the still than it is inside, some of the vapors will condense on their way up. They'll fall back into the pot. They'll be redistilled, and they'll go through that journey over and over again. And the more you do that, the lighter the alcohol becomes.
Yeah.
So the size and shape of the stills, how you're going to run the stills, the speed of distillation, all that stuff will have a big, big impact. And then, of course, maturation.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to put your whiskey in a cask for 3 years, 10 years, 50 years, then of course the wood, what was in the cask before, all of that will have a huge impact on the character of the whiskey.
Yeah. So just to get back to distillation for a second, that's yeah, you know, it's not. I know that it gets more complex than that. Even, you know, it's not just the height of the still. There's different shapes. You know, the swan neck can come over at a particular angle. Some can be very conical. Some can be short and wide. I suppose where you put the heat can be. You know, there's steam jackets, and there's heat coming from directly underneath, and how well that is spread as well, I suppose. And I suppose the temperature that you distill at can also affect the reflux. I guess if you were heating it more aggressively, you might get less reflux. But yeah,
that's right. I mentioned Filtration. One of the things that the distillery manager at Filtration did in the 1950s was, this was probably in response to a blender asking for a particular style of whiskey from his suppliers. The distillery manager was keen to create a lighter type of spirit at Filtration. So the way you do that is you use bigger stills, taller stills. Now, that's expensive. It's difficult. Someone needs to make it. You might not have enough space in your still house to put a taller still. So he thought, well, what I can do is artificially cool the exterior of the environment. And what he did was he built what we call a cooling ring, essentially just a metal ring that goes around the top of the still with holes in it and cold water running through it that trickles down the exterior of the still. And by doing that, we're able to change, and we still do that today, actually. It's worth visiting because, you know, if you go to many distilleries, this is a sight that you will not see anywhere else. It's really striking. Water trickling on the outside of a still. It's like it's raining on it, you know, it's weird. And so we're able to cool the temperature from 80 degrees down to 30 degrees. And as you can imagine, that increases dramatically the amount of reflux, which allows us to produce a lighter type of spirit, a lot more elegant and floral, with lots of tropical fruit notes.
Yeah, I've never thought of that or heard of that happening anywhere else. That's quite unique.
No, yeah, we're speaking to the Forsyth is the company that makes most of the stills in Scotland, and I was speaking to the owners of one of the owners of the business recently, and I was asking, because I've been saying a lot, this is the only place where you can see this, but at the back of my mind I'm thinking, is it really? Because I haven't been to all 100 distilleries, and yeah, he said he can't think of anywhere else where that happens. There's different ways to do that. At Dalmore, and I'll probably talk more about that later, we do have cooling jackets around the outside. So this is like another skin around the still, with water inside it.
Obviously higher up, not down the bottom where you're actually heating. No?
Yeah, it's not exactly where the liquid is boiling, but it's just above it.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to cool and heat at the
No,
same
that's
place.
right.
That
Yeah, so
wouldn't
it
make
just
much
cools
sense.
the vapors. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So just to increase the reflux.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's other places where that happens. Yes.
Well, I've definitely seen. I can't think of any right now, but I've definitely seen places that do things to increase copper contact and therefore create more reflux that way.
Yep.
I'm sure I've seen some places that just add copper balls into the still somewhere.
Yes, well,
I'm
that's
slightly misremembering where it is.
Yeah, so definitely at single grain distilleries, that's where you get that interaction with copper.
Yes, yeah.
So usually the column stills are made out of stainless steel, and somewhere either at the top of the still or in a basket that the vapors go through, you have sacrificial copper, and this is copper. It's got a funny shape as well because a lot of column stills, not a lot of them, but some column stills operate on the vacuum, so you need a particular type of copper packing, which has a specific shape, but it goes in there purely to ensure that the sulfur compounds that are traveling with the vapors interact with the copper and that the copper captures them so that the spirit is free of sulfur at the end of it. And that copper needs to be replaced regularly. So that's why you won't find a still in Scotland that is 100 years old, because unlike other spirit distillation, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Looks good. Unlike other types of spirits, the sulfur is produced during fermentation, and there will be an interaction with copper. That's why the stills are made out of copper. They become thinner over time, so they need to be replaced.
Okay, so copper is pulling sulfur from the spirit before it goes through into barrels.
Exactly.
And to some degree, that's degrading the copper at the same time. So it's all sacrificial to some degree.
Indeed. And it conducts heat as well. So that's why stills are made out of copper, because it's easier to heat up the liquid.
Yeah.
So it works for many reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually didn't know that I knew about the sulfur thing, but I didn't know it was eating away at the copper at the same point. I kind of thought it was a forever thing, but so how long does a still last then, and what happens when you need a new still?
So,
how do you know, and what do you do?
Yeah, so the company I was talking about earlier, they're in a good industry because there are so many distilleries out there. Generally speaking, production of whiskey is increasing. So not only do companies need more stills, but companies also need to replace their stills. And so usually every year, distilleries will close for a number of weeks for a maintenance period. And that's when either whole stills will be replaced, but more likely parts of a still will be replaced. So, you could replace the pot, you could replace the neck, the line arm. The pot tends to be the thicker part, so that tends to last longer. And also, it's not the same interaction there because you don't have the vapors.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably more the vapors, right?
Correct. And the bit that it tends to be the thinnest and the one that wears out more quickly is the very top of it. So where the line arm joins the neck of the still, that bit, you can imagine the vapors hit it. And so that needs to be replaced probably more frequently than a condenser, for example.
Yeah. And they're quite fastidious about the shape, right?
Yes,
when
indeed.
they replace.
Yes,
it needs
indeed.
to be exactly the same.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you have 30 stills, like some distilleries have, less important. But if you have 8, like at this distillery that we're about to talk about, then yes, you have to be careful.
Okay, good segue. Let's go.
Indeed, so because I do want to talk about the stills at the Dalmore distillery. So this is the Dalmore, 15 years old.
Dalmore 15.
Yeah.
It's definitely got some colour to it.
We'll talk about the casks we use in a moment. I'll continue with the distillation topic so that we don't come back to it.
Sure.
It's just so rich, isn't it?
So, a much deeper, more chocolatey toffee note on the nose.
Yeah. Often with the Dalmore, we talk about spice, orange, and chocolate. So I think you've nailed one of the three there.
Yeah, I get.
So there is a piece of equipment at the Dalmore which goes back to the 19th century, and that's a cooling jacket. So we do have a cooling jacket on the spirit stills. That jacket has survived all this time because the vapors don't interact with the copper. You have the neck of the still, then you have water, and then you have the other copper that keeps the water in there. So that
like a
piece,
thermos flask.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So that piece is from the 19th century, but that's because there's no copper interaction with the vapors. So at the Dalmore, there are 8 stills, and the stills are all different. So this is very unusual because at most distilleries, you will find that they maybe started with 2 stills, maybe 3 stills. Sometimes the spirit stills work in pairs, and there's 2 distillations normally for single malt whiskey. So when they've needed to increase production, like we have, at Jura or indeed at Fettercairn, what happens is you add sets of stills. So you add 2 more or 3 more, and then 3 more, and then 3 more.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the idea is that you can produce a whiskey that is either very light, very fruity, very elegant, very, very heavy, very malty, very intense, or degrees in between, depending on the equipment we have. So at Dalmore, we have 8 stills that are unique, but they also have weird features. So I talked about the top part that often needs to be replaced. On some of our stills, we have flat tops. That's something that increases the amount of reflux. The cooling jackets we have also increase the amount of reflux. On some of the spirit stills, we have a copper inside with tubes that let the vapors go through. So huge amount of copper interaction there that also produce a light type of spirit. At the same time, we have other features like the way our line arms are oriented, or condensers that are horizontal as opposed to vertical. So we have features on the 8 stills that produce a really citrusy, rich kind of spirit. Very, very rich is the wrong word. A light citrusy spirit. And we have other features that produce a heavy, malty, rich, intense spirit. We like to call this dual distillation or duality of flavor, but it's this idea that with the 8 stills, we're able to produce essentially 2 styles that then go into a cask, and that is then matured for however long we decide to mature it. So at the Dalmore, actually, because we have this spirit that is both light and heavy, we are able to mature the spirit for long periods of time, because that heavy character that you get from in the new make allows us to mature the spirit for a very long time. And at the same time, that citrus note, and you'll know this with your bartender skills, is very versatile. So it allows us to mature our spirit in a variety of casks, and we use different types of wine casks, port casks, sherry casks to mature the Dalmore. This particular example here, the 15 years old, was matured first in bourbon casks, and then it was finished for up to 3 years in 3 different types of sherry casks. And I wanted to talk about this one because it's important to talk about the complexity of sherry casks. They're not all the same. There are lots of differences. So I thought it would be a good topic for us to talk about.
Absolutely want to get into the sherry casks. Maybe we can just briefly talk about the flavor before we get into sherry cask, though. Maybe it's not the easiest thing to explain how to taste whiskey on a podcast, but you've got we're just drinking out of tumblers here, whereas if we were doing a proper tasting, we'd be using Glencairns or something similar.
Yes. I'm glad we're using these, by the way, as opposed to the...
It feels more relaxed.
That's what I use at home. If I'm at work, I tend to use a nosing glass.
It makes it feel more like a classroom setting if you got a nosing glass.
And often in a bar, when I order a whiskey, I forget to ask to have it in a tumbler, and then it comes in a nosing glass, and I'm always disappointed. Never want to make a fuss, I
export you back to the office.
That's right.
No, I get you. But the nosing glasses are great, but you don't always want to nose every. I mean, I inherently, I suppose, like intuitively, I always nose every glass, and then it's done, and then I just drink my whiskey and get on with it. But if you're drinking a single malt in general and you just want to taste it and maybe improve your palate a little bit and try and look for flavors, just as a very sort of entry level guide, what should we be doing?
Yep.
Sipping very lightly, nosing, nose right in the glass,
Oh, yeah.
adding water, not adding water.
I mean, you'll see lots of videos online. You know, if you
Yeah.
if you research how to nose whiskey, I'm sure you'll have different options.
Mm-hmm.
I always say there's no point in overcomplicating things because it's such a natural thing to do. You all know how to smell stuff when you need to smell stuff. So just do what works for you. I know some people say you need to keep your mouth open. Clearly, if you use a nosing glass, it's true that like that sort of shape will concentrate the aromas, you know, near the top a lot more than a tumbler. So if you're really looking to get into the flavors, yes, use a tulip-shaped glass. That's probably the best glass. Add some water as well if you're focusing on nosing as opposed to tasting.
Yeah.
If you add water, nosing strength is usually around 30% alcohol. So when we compare whiskies, we have a standard strength of around 30%, which is quite low, but it really opens up the whiskey a lot more.
Yeah. I think even for tasting, honestly, for cocktail production as well, but for just general tasting, if I'm trying to, if I'm trying to find some flavors in a whiskey, which sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but if I take a sip and I'm getting some, because quite often the words are elusive, right? You're trying to, what is that? What is that? And if you add a little bit of water to it, it allows some flavors to come through in a more natural way, and it's that, like orange. I might get an orange note from this, but because it's heavy chocolate and spirit, the orange note isn't popping as much. And you add a little bit of water, and citrus notes start to come out, and floral notes start to come out that you can read more easily, which I think is always a good tip, and to let people know that it's okay. Add a little bit of water to it. It makes the whiskey a little bit bigger, which is nice. Makes you drink at a normal speed, because not everyone can drink whiskey at the right speed as well, right? You're used to drinking pints of beer, maybe switching to whiskey is like, that's a very different speed. Whatever, it's like 10% of the speed you need to drink at.
Very much so, yes. The only watch out with water is how it affects the mouthfeel and the finish.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to understand, the texture on the tongue, how long the flavors develop, what flavors develop after you've swallowed the whiskey, adding water will impact all that. So ideally you sort of do both. You're able to do it at the bottling strength, and often the bottling strength in this instance, I can't actually remember what the bottling strength is. It's not quite 40%. It's 42 or 43%, something like that.
Okay.
But the strength was specifically chosen by the whiskey makers to create the right experience that they think is the optimum experience for somebody enjoying the Dalmore 15 years old.
Yeah.
So if you add water, clearly you're going to impact that.
Is that always the case though? Like if I was drinking a single cask that's bottled at cask strength, for example, I made this up, but I sometimes think that they're bottling it at cask strength because partly they expect the people drinking it to have a more refined palate and therefore be able to add water and dilute it to the strength that works for them. So they're kind of giving you a little bit of creative control when they give you a cask strength.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of that for sure. There's also practical reasons. It's not easy to control how much water you add to whiskey before bottling.
No.
And also filtration is another challenge. So if you start reducing the strength down to a certain strength, usually below 46%, then you need to take the whiskey through a process called chilled filtration.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the whiskey is chilled before going through the filter sheets, quite simply. But that's sounds easy to do, but the equipment's expensive. You need the know-how of what temperature do you go for, what speed do you use to go through the filters, which filters do you use. All of that will have an impact on the character of the whiskey. So you need to be careful there. And if I was to start my own business, I definitely would not start doing that because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
So there's an element of giving people the freedom to decide how much water they want to add.
Okay.
There's also an element of it's just easier to bottle at higher strength. So sometimes we bottle whiskies at higher strength as well.
You could argue as well. Maybe this is this is a weak argument, but you could also argue that environmentally, if you ship someone a 46% alcohol and they dilute it themselves to 40% alcohol, you've shipped less volume and therefore
You certainly have.
used less. Your impact, your CO2 impact on the planet is slightly less. I only think of that because I was thinking about it recently for my bar that we try and do some stuff, and part of what we do is try and order things in concentrate and dilute on site. And I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about cleaning products. I'm talking about buying overproof alcohol, and all kinds of stuff. You try and, because water comes out the tap. So why are we shipping water around? There's water in everything. Let's just ship me the concentrate. I can add the water. Anyway, this is just something else.
Well, and it's a good point, and it's a tough conversations because where do you stop? So the whiskey maker's creative vision is, this is the perfect strength, but then you could say, do you really have to use sherry casks for this? Because you're getting sherry casks from Spain. Can you not just reuse the cask you have? You're saving CO2 on transport there as well. And do you really need to use column stills? Pot stills, because they're very inefficient. Maybe you should use a column still. It'll be more efficient. Before you know it, you've got a completely
you got some Frankenstein product, and also even with the water, like even if I'm adding the water myself, it doesn't matter if I'm using if I'm talking about a cleaning product, but if I'm talking about whiskey, where's your water coming from? What's your total dissolved solids? What's the minerality on it? How is it hard or soft? So there is all this kind of how clean are your pipes? Then we just get into a wormhole of confusion.
Thanks for opening that can.
Okay, I'll close it now. So let's talk about chill filtration now. We get back onto something that's more of a real topic. Because I think what people, maybe like not even the average consumer, but maybe a slightly more sort of geeky whiskey connoisseur might have seen non-chill filtered on some labels. And maybe they know the significance of that, but so basically they're saying that it hasn't gone through this chill filtration process. And what I know about it is part of the reason for doing it is so that you don't get a cloudy spirit when it's reduced in alcohol, because there's certain solids which will be dissolved in high strength alcohol that when you dilute it down, you get some kind of loushing like you would with an absinthe, and it goes cloudy, right? And is that the main reason for doing the chill filtration?
Yeah, absolutely. It's to give the whiskey makers the freedom to choose the strength that they think is the optimum strength from a flavor perspective. So without impacting the visual qualities of the whiskeys, because it's true that if this whiskey wasn't chill filtered, so if the whiskey makers said, we've checked the different strength, we want 43 point something, whatever it is, if we didn't chill filter, then the whiskey would be cloudy. And the reason for that is, you're absolutely right. During fermentation, there's a compound that's produced, which at higher strength, that's produced by the yeast, at higher strength, and they're still in there, by the way, there's just fewer of them. That's why you can't see them. But at higher strength, they're dispersed, and therefore you can't see them. But if you reduce the temperature, like in your fridge, or if you were to add water and reduced it down to, again, it depends on the temperature, but say 42%, then the whiskey would start turning cloudy. And that's because those compounds become bigger as they gather and you start seeing them. So one process that you can do is chill the whiskey before filtration. That way it's cold, the compounds gather, they become bigger, and when we push the whiskey through the filter, we can remove them. Now, the debate here is those compounds carry flavor. So the theory is it doesn't take a leap, to say, oh, wait a minute, so you're removing flavor compounds here. So, you're altering my experience of the drink. In theory, yes, but there's very different ways to do this. The temperature at which you filter, the speed at which you push the spirit through the filter sheets, the sheets that you use as well, what are they made of, what type are they? All of that will have an impact on how many compounds you remove.
And is that regulated?
It's not, no. So that's down to, because it could be a good thing. You could decide as a whiskey maker, oh, this one is just too intense. I could use that process, push it to the limit, to remove more of the flavor to get to what I'm looking for. So no, it's not regulated. But in most cases, what producers want to do is not to remove flavor.
Yeah, of course.
At least not to the level that the human nose can perceive it. And the challenge here is that most people will never have access to this whiskey before and after chill filtration. So you kind of have to take my word for it that I can't taste the difference between this whiskey before and after chill filtration.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true that in theory, you are removing flavor. And some people generally believe that they can taste the difference. So that's why we make both, frankly.
Yeah.
We have whiskies at higher strengths that are not chill filtered, and we have whiskies at lower strengths that are chill filtered. That way, you can find something you like.
Yeah, and there's not really that much to gain. I can understand, people are cynical, and they're right to be. The world is a is a place which invites much cynicism, but there's not that much to gain from chill filtering that I can imagine there's being some nefarious reason for doing it. Like I don't see
why would you remove flavor.
Yeah, right. It's not massively increasing the profit margin. Like you're just
I guess
you're just going through an extra process, and I guess you can dilute the product down to 40% and therefore get a touch more volume. Yeah. But I think people are willing to pay a little bit more for a 46% alcohol or 46% Scotch than a 40% maybe.
Yeah, and I've no idea how much the chill filtration process costs. I know the equipment is expensive. You need to chill the whiskey. You need somebody to actually do that as well. So it takes time. I don't know. I generally don't know. I have no idea if anybody has the answer, whether you get more profit from not chill filtering than chill filtering and adding water. I have no idea.
I can't imagine it has much impact in the grand scheme of things. When we talk about barley and water and maturation and warehouses and visitor centers, I imagine chill filtration is less than 1% if it's anything at all.
Yeah, you're right. Most of the costs is in maturation, and that's going back to blends earlier as well. And the point that people sometimes I've heard conversations where people will say, "Oh, this is a good blend because there's a lot of malt whiskey in it." And that, again, that's such a shortcut, a bit like with chill filtration, where you say chill filtered bad, non-chill filtered good. It's just easy to remember, but it's not. The reality is more complex than that. So with a younger blend, you don't want to use too much malt whiskey because, as we discussed earlier, malt whiskey takes longer to mature. So at a younger age, you want to use more single grain than single malt in your blend.
Yeah. At
an older age, you might want to use more malt than grain because you don't want the grain to be dominated by the wood. So the point here that I was trying to make is that most of the cost in whiskey making is maturation.
Yeah.
And so the difference in cost between single grain spirit and single malt spirit, after 12 years of maturation or 30 years of maturation, the difference is tiny.
Yeah.
Because most of the cost is in those casks.
Well, it was much cheaper to produce the raw spirit. That cost saving diminishes over time because of the cost of storing it in warehouses, basically, and in barrels and buying the barrels and having the coopers to fix the barrels and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
absolutely.
And that also it both dominates the cost and it dominates the flavor as well, right? The actual maturation process is the most impactful.
I think so.
You could argue peat as well, for some brands,
completely,
where they're very, very smoky. But
yeah, I know. Sometimes you'll see. I often get emails from people asking, "Can I say that 70% of the flavor in this whiskey comes from the cask?" And I have no idea where that came from.
Yeah, everyone uses that. I use that statistic. Yeah.
Again, it's one of these things that's just so easy to remember.
Yeah. Everyone, like you said before, like everyone wants a simple answer. And you're like, give me a percentage. You're like, 70. I don't know. Someone just said 70 one day, and it's like, sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's like everything in this planet, everything in this industry for sure has an exception, like, so you know, like when you're trying to sort of give people memorable thing, like statistics are nice, like it's nice to throw them out there, and 70% seems as good a number as any to me.
It's probably close enough for a lot of whiskies, actually. But definitely
around,
not all.
It's like for everything you need to say around 70% of the flavor comes from maturation.
Exactly.
So tell us that we took a massive detour there, but I didn't forget that we started talking about sherry finishes.
Yes.
So first of all, just before we get to sherry finishes,
Another detour.
but maturation in general. So all Scotch has to go into ex-bourbon casks first. No,
No.
it doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to. It's usually what happens, but not always.
Okay.
So the legislation says that Scotch whisky has to be matured in oak casks. So that's oak is important here because other types of whiskies might be able to use other types of wood. So oak casks for a minimum of 3 years in Scotland in casks that are not bigger than 700 liters.
Okay.
So that means that you can't use a huge vat and say, oh, that's it. It's been matured for 3 years and I can...
Used or new?
It doesn't specify.
No?
Usually, Scotch producers would prefer to use second-hand casks, mostly because whiskey is matured for so long that you don't want the wood to dominate the whiskey. New wood can be used, and usually it's used as a finishing. So what it means is, like for this one, the finishing is in Oloroso sherry casks after 12 years of maturation in bourbon casks. But what you could do is mature the whiskey in bourbon casks, in sherry casks for 12 years and then marry them. Or you could do just sherry casks. You could do just wine casks, just port. You can do that too. It doesn't have to be secondhand. It doesn't have to be bourbon first.
But the majority of the industry there's a lot of bourbon casks.
Yeah,
because of
it's
how
the
bourbon
it's
is.
the main type of cask. You're right. So if you go back long enough, so the Dalmore has been using sherry casks from a specific partner in Spain called González Bias. We've been working with them since 1910s. I can't remember. I think it's 1915 or 1918. And so sherry casks have been around in Scotland for a long time, mostly because sherry was shipped to the UK in casks, and it would be bottled in the UK, and then producers had access to sherry casks. And back then, remember, the Dalmore was probably different in the context that we specifically developed a relationship with these people in order to find casks that perfectly complemented the unique qualities of the spirit that I talked about, that light, that duality of flavor I talked about. For a lot of producers in those years, especially before 1915, when you didn't need to mature whiskey, because the legislation was introduced in 1915. Before then, whiskey didn't have to be matured in oak casks. So casks were used more for storage, for transport, than contributing to the character of the whiskey. But the thing that really changed the landscape was legislation in the US, where in the 1950s, 1960s, legislation changed that said that American whiskey had to be matured in new oak casks.
Yes.
So suddenly we had, there was a huge supply of casks that weren't available before. And so nowadays the dominant type of wood in Scotch whisky is American oak, ex-bourbon casks, and sherry casks are probably the second most popular. But not all sherry casks are the same. It's very important to understand that.
Yeah.
Oloroso is probably the most famous type of sherry cask used in Scotland. But a lot of the casks now are what we call seasoned. So it means that the demand for sherry casks in Scotland is now greater than the demand for sherry. So an industry has emerged in Spain, which is about seasoning casks, building casks, seasoning them, and sending them to Scotland so that Scotch producers can mature their whiskey in sherry casks to get the right flavors. Now, these casks are good, by the way. We use them for some of our whiskies. And they give you, the sort of flavors that you would expect from sherry casks. You can also get access to, if you work hard, get access to very different types of sherry casks. So because we've had this relationship with González Bias, and this is just one example that extends to the relationship that we have with the port houses and wine producers and so on. Here, this whiskey was finished in 3 types of Oloroso sherry casks that you may not have heard of. Methuselah,
Methuselah.
Apostolese, And I got you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And the other one is Amoroso. Amoroso. Essentially, they are both sweetened Oloroso sherry casks. So they're made from the Palomino Fino grape, but also with a little bit of Pedro Jimenez grapes.
Mm-hmm.
And Amoroso, so the Methuselah is matured for 30 years. So you have a cask, that's contained sherry for 30 years, full of flavor and extra sweetness coming from the PX. Apostoli's is similar, except that it's matured for about 15 years, and a Moroso is a little bit younger. The Apostoli's also has a smaller percentage of PX than the Methuselah. But anyway, the point is, these casks, when you nose them, when they come to the distillery, compared to the seasoned sherry cask that we also acquire, they're very, very different.
Yeah.
Those dried fruit notes that we get here, the nuttiness in particular, the chocolate, which also comes from the new make in the Dalmore, that really gets enhanced when you start using these sort of casks.
Yeah. I mean, that speaks to your point about, that people want short answers, and they're often not sufficient at all, because you say sherry finished in a 3-year-old, finished for 3 years in a sherry cask. Well, it's like, well, how long was the sherry in that cask? And then you start pulling the thread,
that's right.
and you're like, well, what kind of sherry was it? And then you start, well, where were the grapes grown? And even, the age of the cask, even if you're not even talking about finishes, like it can be a first fill cask. Do we say first fill in Scotch, or am I mixing it up with American? I basically mean, is it if it comes directly over from America, let's say if it's a bourbon cask and you fill it up with Scotch, maybe you reburn it and you fill it up with Scotch, versus it's already aged Scotch for 12, 15 years, and then you use it again.
Yeah.
You're still going to if you put whiskey in that barrel for another 10 years, that whiskey is still 10 years old, but the barrel might be 50 years old by now.
Correct.
So it's going to give off less flavor, right? So even the age statement fails to convey the information that it's supposed to convey, right? Like
correct.
To some point.
I mean, even these casks, I'm not sure about the Amoroso actually, but the Apostoli's and the Methuselah, they go into the bodega system. So is that the right word I'm using?
No.
That's what I'm realizing this is not correct.
Solera.
The Solera, thank you very much. Thank you.
It's in a bodega, though. You're in a bodega. In the right area.
I said it. It's right. So in the Solera system, you're right. You don't actually know how long they've been there. The casks could be 100 years old.
Yeah.
What I know is that when you stick your nose in these casks, you're just hit with that rich aroma of dried. It smells of the sun. Really. That's the best way to describe it. Dried fruits, nuttiness, maybe a little bit of leather in there.
That's what you want, and that's what I want from a sherry finish in a whiskey. I love a sherry finish. Always have done.
I guess it depends on the style of whiskey you're trying to produce, right? There's the right whiskey for the right moment. So those seasoned sherry casks, don't get me wrong, they're not bad. I think the message here is, there's more complexity than what you might think when you first try to understand how the whiskies are matured.
Yeah. Something I used to do when I was teaching more often is I used to try and push sherry, like not necessarily because I love sherry that much, but because I want more barrels to end up in Scotland. And therefore we end up with more sherry finished Scotch, because I understand that those two industries are, what's the word when two animals? Yeah.
I mean, it's like these casks, we have exclusive access to these casks. There's just not enough for Gonzalez Bias to supply everyone. So you're right. There's the more
symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, indeed.
But what about seasoning sherry then? So seasoning sherry goes into barrels just to season the barrels. That's their primary focus.
Yeah.
What happens to that sherry?
Good question. Yeah.
Nobody knows.
I'd like to know. I've tried to get answers, and my assumption is that a lot of it is distilled and becomes brandy. And don't get me wrong, again, it's not bad. It's not poisonous, right? It doesn't end up in a bottle, but it doesn't mean that it's not good. So I suspect some of it is distilled. Maybe some of it is turned to vinegar brandy as well. So that's my best guess. But every time I ask the question, I don't get a straight answer.
Yeah, well, it's the same as when you ask the questions about Solera, and you
Right.
try and get to the bottom of that. I mean, I've been in some Spanish brandy places because they use Solera system. It's very Spanish
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Portuguese. The Mediterranean love the Solera system. It
Does it
seems
not mean bottom as well, Solera?
Solera. I don't
No.
actually know. What does
Yeah.
Solera mean? You're
Is
Portuguese?
it not? Is it not bottom? Yeah.
No.
I thought. Yeah. Right. Anyway,
Um,
kidding.
yeah. So. Um, Yeah, well, when I try and ask about the Solera system, and I've asked in many different places, and different people have different answers because there is different ways to do it, and then there's different legislation about what you're allowed to write on the bottle. The famous one is
Yes.
Zacapa, who have Zacapa 23, but it's a Solera system, and you could kind of say anything you want. All you need is those barrels at the bottom of the triangle if you're doing it in a classic pyramid system,
Yes.
which they don't always do. They do that more for visual representation than anything else. Usually it's just batches over here and batches over here, but to understand it, they put it in a triangle, a pyramid shape, and then the ones on the bottom are the oldest, and you keep dropping down and adding older spirits to the next one. But then what they write on the bottle at the end, considering technically, if you've been doing the same system for 150 years and you just keep adding to the same batch and then taking some out, and you never actually empty the barrel,
Yes.
technically something in there is 150 years old. So why aren't you
Indeed.
writing 150? It's really just the establishment of the Solera system. Whenever you started doing it, that's how old the spirit is. So it should age 1 year every year.
Yes.
But they pick a number and they stick with that. And there's various reasons for that. Sometimes it's average age. I know for some, rum is the classic one. It's just such the wild regulation for rum is so wild because it's loads of different Caribbean islands that all disagree about whether you should add caramel, whether you should be able to add anything, whether you're allowed to age or not age, or filter through charcoal, or or do the Solera system. Whether you can just put any number on the bottle, whether it's the lowest number or the average number. There's differences. Rum is wild.
I think part of the reason why Scotch whisky has become so successful and is the biggest whisky category by far is because the regulations, as much as we sometimes hate them, because you could say it restricts creativity.
Yeah.
I think it gives people confidence that what they're getting when they're buying a bottle of Scotch, they know that the age statement means the youngest whiskey in the bottle. No age statement, it's at least 3 years. There's a few guarantees there. The size of the cask that I mentioned. So there's a few rules like that at least guarantee a certain standard. So that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Actually, the rules were loosened recently. We're talking about cask finishes here. In 2019, the Scotch Whisky Association allowed producers to start using more a broader variety of casks for finishes. So things like tequila and shochu and baijiu, we couldn't use that before, but now we're allowed to use them. We haven't produced anything with those casks yet, but I guess it's a very small step.
No, but I guess maybe you'll start to see some some tequila finishes or something like that in a few years' time.
Possibly.
But 2019 is 5 years ago, so maybe it's not even enough time for us to see much happen.
No. There must have been some, but
yeah.
Hello. Here we are. Thank you very much. We've finished it with a cocktail.
Thank you, sir.
That looks spot on.
All right, so I forced you to bring a cocktail as well as two scotches.
You forced me,
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, well, tell us what this is because.
So I'm not a mixologist, so I enjoy cocktails, but it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. No. However, this one is one that I can easily make at home, which I do, and I was first introduced to it during an interview. So I was interviewing for a global brand ambassador position, and part of the tasks was to create a cocktail and talk to us about it. And the person who created this cocktail got the job, not just because the cocktail was amazing, but also because he was the right person for the job. But ever since the cocktail was introduced, we've actually started using it as part of the cocktails that we recommend for the Dalmore and it's one that's super easy to make. So what you do is you take some Dalmore 15 years old, a bottle, ideally for simplicity. You add 100 grams of raisins. You leave the two together for 2 to 3 days. Then you just need to strain the whiskey because some of the raisins will start dissolving. So you can do that using a simple like coffee filter.
Yep.
Might need to filter it twice. And you don't need to add sugar because you get the sugar from the raisins, which is a bonus, I guess, for some people. And you can garnish it with the raisins that you've used to infuse the whiskey.
Yeah, and I can see from the color of the raisins, or the state of the raisins, that some's definitely in that whiskey. So essentially, you're playing on the Pedro Jimenez finish that's already in the whiskey because you've got raisins in there. And you add in a little bit of sweetness, and you said orange bitters as well, right?
Orange bitters, I forgot the orange bitters. That's right. Yeah, 3 dashes. Yeah.
Right. Let's have a taste of this. I'm excited about this actually.
Me too.
Yep. Yeah, those raisins just pop through like a Pedro Jimenez finish or something. It's very reminiscent of that. Yeah. Which
super easy to make. You can keep it in your fridge. Pour it when you get home.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's essentially an old fashioned, but it's a bit more fruity actually. Like I get fruity notes from those, more fruity notes than I expected from the raisins.
And if you eat the raisins, you get one of your 5 a day. So
okay. Right. So there's 2 raisins here. That counts as 2. Oh wow.
So they've been in there 3 days. Yes, nearly 3 days.
Those raisins have got some kicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, what we were talking. Oh yeah. All right. That's what I was going to ask you about just before we.
That's how raisins should taste.
Yeah. If they all tasted like that,
I'd
get drunk off my muesli in the morning. Yeah. No age statement, because I know this is a I don't know if it's a hot topic, but it's been discussed. It's very much it's one of those like non-chill filtered. It's maybe, I don't know whether, I think it's coming more from the supply side than the demand side maybe. What's its place in Scotch? Was, I guess the way I see it is like no age statement whiskies really, they're trying to take age out of the equation so that they can produce the best spirit they possibly can. Maybe some people are also going to take advantage of it in a less sort of a less value oriented way. But I think there's an honest approach to it, which could be that you just want to make the best whiskey you possibly can, and you don't want to be tied to an age statement, because I think for people to know the basics of age, if you put a drop of 8-year-old whiskey in your Dalmore 15, it's now an 8-year-old whiskey, even if it's 1 drop, right?
Yeah.
So no age statement kind of allows some more creative freedom, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, you've answered it. The one thing I would add is it's not a new thing. First blended whiskey we tried, I mentioned, was first blended in the 19th century. There was no age statement on it. Most of the whiskey that is sold around the world has no age statement, and it doesn't seem to bother anyone. But you're right. The key benefit here is it gives the whiskey maker even more flexibility to be creative, because if you're bottling a whiskey at 12 years and you want to use the 12-year age statement, then you can only use whiskeys that are at least 12 years. But if you are not using an age statement, then you could use younger whiskeys, older whiskeys, and you can start marrying different flavors that are not normally married together if you stick to age statements. So at the end of the day, it's another choice, I guess, that we give consumers. And I know they've become more popular with single malts more recently, which is why you're talking about it now. And they seem to be very popular. So the consumer is king. If people are buying them, it must mean that they're happy with the benefits of whiskeys that have no age statement.
Yeah, okay. But I know. I think, like you said, it's always been a thing with blends, and maybe it's a more new thing with malts, right? With single malts.
Yeah, yeah. So single malt, the Dalmore, you've been able to find the Dalmore around the world since the 19th century, but the volumes of single malt whiskey that have been available around the world in the 19th century was very, very small. Most of the whiskies were blended and sold as blends.
Mm.
It's really from the end of the 20th century when companies started promoting single malt as its own thing. But in these early years, those single malt whiskies didn't have age statement either. That's something that's appeared a little bit later. And so age statements really, you're talking maybe 1980s, 1990s.
Mm.
So I know it's
Yeah,
a
so it's
long
fair.
time ago
No, but
for a lot
yeah,
of people,
for Scotch,
but no,
that's nothing.
no,
That's
that's
a
right. Yes.
that's
Uh,
yesterday for Scotch.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess there's always been both for a while. It's just that recently then they've become more popular. And
Mhm.
and I guess the reason why they've become more popular is because there is demand for them.
Yeah.
Companies wouldn't make a whiskey that is not going to sell. So
No.
I couldn't tell you who was the first to promote single malts with no age statements
Mm.
recently. But whoever it was, other producers will have spotted that, oh, wait a minute, this one seems to be doing well. Maybe we should create our own whiskies like that. And the whiskey
Yeah.
makers must have thought, oh, brilliant. So you mean I can have the freedom to choose whatever I want now? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's grown from there.
Mm. Because it must be difficult. I mean, well, it's complicated, I suppose, but like to predict the amount. I mean, this is probably why trade is really important. But I'm just trying to think, like, if you're selling a 15-year-old Scotch, um, that means today we're benefiting of the decisions that were made 15 years ago to
Mhm.
some degree. Which means someone 15 years ago thought, I think in 15 years people will drink this much
Yeah, yeah,
Scotch and they'll prefer this and this.
yeah.
15 years ago, it was 2009, the
That's-
first iPhone.
yes, that's right. Yes.
That's-
It's a job in itself.
yeah,
For sure, we try to predict how much whiskey we're going to need in 10, 20, 30 years' time, and we schedule production accordingly.
yeah,
So every year, the distilleries have different production targets. The people who source casks from us are then told, okay, we need X amount of Maturation sherry casks, we need X amount of bourbon casks, X amount of port casks, and the spirit goes into these casks, and inevitably we get it wrong. So we do have to tweak things, and that's why sometimes products go out of stock. The Dalmore is often on allocation. It means that we only sell it to certain
yeah,
places, certain customers, because there isn't enough of it.
yeah, yeah. How
Nice
do you
problem to have.
respond to peaks? And if you all of a sudden get popular, you'll be like, yeah, can you give us 15 years to catch up, guys?
Yeah,
We need a bit more time.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
But this
But
is why you have to trade, and you always
yeah,
have to be able to adjust the recipe, right? It's like
yes,
we always have to be able to make this with what's available, kind of. And that's what the master blender has to do. And that's the challenge they face, I suppose.
indeed.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I had a thought just as you were speaking before, because you mentioned 1915, right? When maturation became compulsory.
Yeah,
Originally 2 years.
yeah.
Now, my thought around that is, it like, first of all, if that really is like the beginning of formalized maturation, would you then say that is it? Do you think realistically before 1915 were whiskies clear? Were they transparent, never in a barrel, or were they just transported in a barrel and therefore maybe they spent 6 months in a barrel? Like, what would your perception be? I guess no one really knows for sure, but like, what's your perception of what whiskey would have been like in 1910?
Yes. So we know that with the relationship with Gonzales Bias, that the Mackenzie brothers, who were running the distillery at the time, were using sherry casks in the 19th century. So it goes as far as 19th century, and we can see from the notes that there was some recasking going on as well. So clearly, if there was recasking going on, it's to do with flavor and character.
What do you mean by
Oh,
recasking?
recasking means that the whiskey is transferred from one cask to another, so finishing
Oh,
in a
okay,
way.
okay.
On the paper I'm thinking of, it said recasked into sherry
So
casks.
it's clearly more than transport. It's
Yeah.
there's a reason that they're flavoring.
Yes. What I don't know is how few and far between those examples were, and if it was mostly about transport, storage. I suspect it was mostly about transport and storage back then, because the early days of whiskey, things could be added to it as well. If you go back in even further, you're talking about a new make spirit with herbs and honey added to it, to make it smoother and easier to drink, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I just think it's it'd be interesting because I think you naturally think, you go back 200 years and you would have these beautiful, like mellow, dark spirits, and you're like, no, everything was, like pretty much like aging is fairly new. Like aging seems like older than time, but actually, we didn't really formalize it
No.
until a couple of hundred years ago.
No, and I think the reason why it was formalized was clearly during the war, 1915. I think it was to reduce the amount of Scotch whisky that was available at the time.
Yeah.
And that's why initially, plus also a lot of the distilleries, well, not a lot, but some distilleries were requisitioned for ammunition production. The Dalmore was indeed. And then I think that's why it was extended by 1 year, because the war was finished, but there was still a desire to restrict the amount of whiskey that was available. So the motivation for it was not to protect the taste or the category or consumer demand or anything like that. It was more war needs.
Yeah. Supply and demand and economics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, it's similar to like I have a patchy memory on this a little bit, but you mentioned when the law changed in America to mean that bourbon had to go into new oak, and I think the reason for that was largely due to the timber industry in North America and Canada. Well, Canada is North America, but the USA and Canada lobbying for that, like because they want to sell more wood, basically. So if everyone puts everything into new oak, that means every year they need to buy new barrels.
That's right.
And I think about the impact that's had on every spirit industry in the world. Literally, the North American timber industry has massively impacted every aged spirit on the planet, because now nearly every aged spirit on the planet uses aged, like, ex-bourbon barrels for aging.
It's so true.
Yeah,
it's so true.
That's wild.
Yes.
Yeah. I would love for the Spanish to come up with the same law for sherry, and that way we get more sherry finishes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got many questions to go through. I see you've got a long list of questions there for me.
Just making sure that people are informed.
Just feel sorry for people listening to us, behind the wheel or on the run.
They're geeks. Love it. Yeah, we talked about water.
We did, yes.
Talked about distillation size.
Right, we're ticking a lot of boxes there.
See, I knew we'd do it naturally. Barley quality, chill filtering.
Talked about that.
Experimental maturation. Is there such thing in Scotland as experimentation? I mean, I guess regulations, like you say, are very tight.
Yes,
with maturation, but is there anything weird and wonderful that's happening in Scotland?
Yeah, so it used to be even more restricted than it is now, but there are some things that we can't get away from. So we have to use oak. It has to be 3 years. It has to be casks no bigger than 700 liters. Before 2019, it had to be a cask that we had to demonstrate to the SWA that the casks were traditionally used, as in they had been used in the past, to mature Scotch whisky. So still quite loose, but we couldn't just use any type of cask. And then in 2019, the regulations changed to allow the use of broader types of second-hand casks. So I haven't really seen that many coming out, that have fully exploited this loosening of the legislation.
Mm.
I also know that some distilleries have experimented with things like heating warehouses to try and affect the speed of maturation, the rate of evaporation,
Yeah.
but nothing that has become a new industry norm,
Yeah.
if you like.
Because maturation in Scotland obviously would be, and this is another thing, which is another variable. It's going to be a lot slower than it would be in a warmer climate, like the Caribbean, for example. So, like you see these big numbers on Scotch, and you don't see them necessarily on rum, for example.
That's right.
But a large degree of that is if you age rum in the Caribbean for 15 years, you lose 70% of it, and it tastes caramel. Like, you lose a lot of the flavor as well. So it's like you've got this long, slow, cold maturation with variation in seasons for sure, but it goes from cold to tepid and then back to cold again in Scotland, right? It never gets 40 degrees more.
No, you're right. And the warehouses act a bit like a fridge.
Yeah.
The temperature tends to be quite constant because there is so much liquid in there at a certain temperature that by the time, so you're right, the temperature difference between winter and summer is not huge in Scotland. And by the time that small difference would have an impact, then you're into the next season again. And the differences are small. Suppose it's interesting to talk about the different types of warehouses, because that will have an impact on the character of the whiskey. The most traditional type of warehouse is called a dunnage warehouse. So these are the ones that you see on all the pictures.
Yeah.
Earthen floors, the casks are stacked 3 high.
On their side, usually.
On their side.
Is that important?
More for leaks than anything else.
Yeah.
But, because the casks tend to be filled on their side, so the bunghole is on the side.
Yeah.
Less so now because of the new types of warehouses that have appeared. So in the 1960s is when racked warehouses started appearing. Now these are, have you ever been to the top of one of them?
I think so, yeah. Not in Scotland, but yes. It gets warmer, right?
Striking.
Significantly.
Yeah. Significantly, yes. A lot more so than you would expect until you actually take the steps up there to feel the heat. But so racked warehouses are maybe 11 high. I think that's the tallest that I've seen. I actually love these warehouses because the smell in each type is very different. So the Danish warehouses are more like what you would expect a whiskey warehouse to smell like.
Yeah.
So they smell more like whiskey, if you like. The racked warehouses are more, bizarrely, more like, almost like more earthy, which it should be the opposite, but you almost smell more like fungus and mushroom, and there's a different smell that I really like in those racked warehouses. And yes, when you go to the top, the temperature is significantly higher. And then the newest type of warehouse is a palletized warehouse.
Yeah.
So this is where you take a pallet, and it's more for bourbon casks. You will put 6 bourbon casks on a pallet upright, as opposed to on their side.
Yeah.
So these ones will be filled usually, but not always, through the cask end rather than the side to avoid leakage.
Yeah.
And you put the pallets on top of each other.
Yeah.
And that makes it much easier to move casks, because you can use a machine that moves 6 casks, moves the whole pallet in six casks at a time. And these ones smell a lot more woody. Yeah. Because you can smell the pallets.
Yeah. I think I have a vague memory of that. Yeah, because I've been in some palletized warehouses. But more, I feel like grain distilleries palletize.
Yes.
They're on a much bigger scale, and your dunnages are more for malts. I'm sure it's not.
Yes.
Perfectly like that, but
no, it depends on when the distillery was built, when the warehouses were built. So if you built warehouses in the 1960s, you built racked warehouses, and most companies are making the most of the warehouses they have, and it does make sense to put casks which are going to mature for longer in a dunnage warehouse, because they're much harder to move.
Mm.
You're moving one at a time. It's a lot more manual as well.
Yeah.
But if you are going to mature your whiskey for 5 years, then you want to put it into a palletized warehouse. It's a lot easier to move those casks.
But do you move the casks in Scotland still? Because you pump it out of one cask and pump it into another, no?
No. So even when we do finishes and recasking, usually what happens is the cask is completely emptied, collected in a trough, and goes into a tank, and then it goes back into the next type of cask that you want to put it in.
Okay. Yeah, because I've not experienced it in Scotland, but I know I think I've been in some rum or brandy just warehouses where the barrels are it's like a racked warehouse, or whatever their equivalent is. The bung hole is angled up and they never move. They're stuck there. When they want to take the spirit out of a barrel, they open the bung hole, they chuck a pipe in there, they pump it out. They might pump something else in there, and they just move everything around with pumps. And the barrels never move. It kind of preserves the barrel or whatever. But you don't really do that in Scotland.
No. I've seen that done in a few places. Majority of places will just take the cask, empty it, and then the cask can be. Often the casks are rejuvenated, actually at distilleries, so it means that they are decharred, so they're scraped on the inside to expose fresh wood, and then they're charred again, so they're burnt again to caramelize.
After each sort of aging or whatever.
Not always. It depends on, different distilleries will have different processes. The most standard way of doing it is you check the color of the spirit coming out of the cask, and depending on the color that you're getting, you decide whether you need to rejuvenate the cask or not. So if you're still getting enough color, it means that the cask is still very much active, so you can fill it again. But if not, then that's when it goes for rejuvenation.
Yeah. Okay. I want you to debunk something for me.
Okay.
Flash photography in well, it's generally donages, but like the amount of times I've been told like you can't take pictures in here because and the message, at least it used to be, maybe it's not so much now, the message was that flash photography could explode the building because of the spirit vapors in the air. Is that real?
Yeah, I mean, remember, I managed the visitor center, so I know the amount of...
what did you used to say?
Last week I was having a conversation about the temperature that wax needs to be at to be safe for people to seal their bottles with wax. So the amount of health and safety rules that I've learned, not the most exciting part of the role, but you're absolutely right. There is a risk. In theory, there is a risk. So the science shows that there could be a flashpoint, and there is a risk. The chances are absolutely tiny. But as a responsible employer, you cannot take the risk when you know there is a risk. So there's ways to make it safe. We're at some of our distilleries, we have permanent gas meters. So they check the atmosphere to check whether it is explosive or not. Because in most circumstances, I've taken, I don't know how many journalists in warehouses with cameras. And when you do that, you need to write a permit to work. You need to have a gas meter to constantly check the atmosphere.
Okay.
The thing has never beeped to say to me, leave or stop what you're doing. But the science tells us there can be a risk.
Yeah.
Don't take the chance,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I suppose it's also maybe based on some older cameras with big flashes on. I remember when I was
you
young,
say that, but
those flashes that go and you're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Well, I know. I was speaking to our health and safety colleague actually about that point exactly, and he made the point that actually the new phones are probably even more dangerous now, because when they catch fire, they properly catch fire. And what you're going to do, you're going to throw it away from you if it starts burning in your pocket. And he was making the point that it could end up near a still, it could end up near the spirit safe, it could end up near a cask, depending on where you are. So that's probably even more worrying than the old types. Yeah.
So you still take the phones off people before they go into the warehouse?
No, we don't. So we have
say no.
This thing. This is super boring for everyone, but there's this thing called ATEX zoning, I believe it's what it's called. But every part of the distillery falls under a different grade, and depending on where you are, it's safe to use your camera or it's not. So and if it's not, then I think there's 3 levels. One where you can do whatever you want, another one where you need to have a gas meter, another one where
Okay.
it's a big no. So depending on where you are, you can't take pictures. We don't
Right.
take people's phone away.
Okay. I've had
We
that.
did,
though.
we did,
I've
we
had
did,
that. Yeah,
we
yeah,
did do
back in the
when I joined. There was a period when we did do that, but we're not doing it anymore.
Okay. No
Yeah.
worries. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, yeah, you surprised me a little bit there. That sounds a bit more legit. I just thought there were some nefarious reason for it. Like they didn't want me to take pictures of their warehouse or something.
I mean, you must have seen pictures of warehouse men moving casks into
Yeah.
a warehouse with a cigarette, right? In
Yeah,
America.
yeah, back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
But accidents happen probably more back then than they do today. So
yeah. Oh, I mean, I've seen videos of warehouses burning down, and once they start, they do not stop.
no,
Yeah,
and we joke about health and safety until something happens,
yeah.
and then imagine if I knew that I could have stopped something.
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy that's lax on the rules and then
No,
yeah,
and then
gets in trouble.
we have children going around distilleries as well. Anybody over 8 years old is allowed to visit. So
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's a child or an adult, anyway, you don't want anybody getting hurt.
No,
so,
no. Yeah.
especially when there's ways to make it safe.
Yeah. All right, let's finish off with this with
Something more positive.
something more positive. Yeah. I'll try and think of something more positive than children dying in a fire. But yeah, world whiskies. Like, what's apart from Scotch? I mean, Japanese is the big one, right? How does Japanese differ from Scotch? I know like a lot of it is not a carbon copy, but it mimics Scotch in some way because that's how it sort of that's where it learnt from.
Yeah.
What's different in Japanese? What are the key differences between Japanese whiskey and Scotch whiskey? Would you say?
So Japanese whiskey goes back to the 1920s, really, and essentially the inspiration for Japanese whiskey came from Scotch Whisky Distilleries. The main difference, though, is first of all there are far fewer distilleries there than there are in Scotland, and also the way that things have evolved over the years. For many years, there were only sort of 2 companies that were running the few distilleries that were there. So each distillery, especially single malt distillery, have been set up to produce different styles of whiskey. So that's probably the main difference. Where in Scotland, if you think about Dalmore, you know what the Dalmore style is. Whereas in a Japanese distillery, you might have different brands coming out of a single distillery.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of flavor profile, the only point of difference that is worth mentioning, I guess, is the use of Japanese oak, which does contribute different flavors to the spirit. Now, not all Japanese whiskies are matured in Japanese oak. There isn't that much of it out there. And in a way, it's a bit like Scottish oak in the way that it's not that easy to process into casks. But it does give more like incense flavors. It's more perfumey. And so that's quite interesting. If you can find a Japanese whiskey that has a high amount of Japanese oak, it's something that I would recommend for a different experience.
Okay. Does that mean that they tend to use more new oak than Scotland as well then? Because they're using Japanese oak, which
Yeah,
I
I think
isn't used anywhere else.
in the same way that we've started using Scottish oak actually at some of our distilleries, especially at Cairn. And not normally what you would do is the first time you would use it, it would be virgin, brand new. It's been charred or toasted, but then you would reuse the casks. So if you're doing a finishing, the first time the finishing might just be needed for 3 months, but then the second time you might be looking at maybe a year, and then you increase that time in the cask until maybe you get to a stage where you do the full maturation in Scottish oak. Or
so you're trying to mellow the barrel out incrementally with the spirit before you start using it for a full maturation.
That's right. Yes.
What about any other countries that pop out to you as big players in the whiskey industry or producing anything interesting?
Yeah, maybe not big players, but it's true that most countries have some form of whiskey distillery nowadays.
Yeah.
Sweden is probably a country that has more distilleries than other sort of newer nations. And again, the inspiration there was more Scottish whiskey than other types of whiskies.
Because they love Scotch in Sweden, right? They love smoky Scotch,
especially smoky whiskies. You're right. Yes, they use Swedish oak there as well, which is again maybe closer to Japanese and Scottish oak than American oak.
Is this not all European oak, or is
Well,
Swedish oak somehow different to European oak?
yes. So in Scotland, in the few instances where we found, it's important to understand there is no supply chain of Scottish oak. There is nobody that grows trees to supply wood to sawmill to supply the cooperages with.
Wild caught. Are you out there sawing down trees, Ludo?
No. I do. Yeah, I do. I do have a chainsaw, but not for that purpose. So we source for Fettercairn either trees that have been wind fell or trees from forests that are managed sustainably. So it does make sense as part of managing a forest to sometimes cut
Thin
down
it out,
certain trees. Yeah. So it's an interesting project actually, which one of our whiskey makers, Greg Glass, probably the most exciting project that I've come across in this industry. So it's definitely worth talking about. I'm glad you mentioned it. But he thought, why do we import casks from America, from Spain, from all these other countries when we have oak in Scotland? The difficulty is the lack of supply chain. So not just the lack of forest supplying trees, but also the lack of sawmill who are able to cut the trees the right way to then convert those pieces of wood into casks. And the coopers in Scotland are only able to fix casks, not build casks from scratch, because that's all that's required, because there's been this constant supply of Spanish oak and American oak casks. So he thought, well, these are problems, but there's got to be a way to solve these issues. So he started speaking to different forests, to different forest owners, I guess, to sawmill, to cooperages, in particular the Speyside cooperage in Craigellachie. And eventually he's managed to create a number of Scottish oak casks, which are now used not just by us, because the motivation was not just to create casks just for Whyte and Mackay, but to create casks for the whole industry, really. His ambition is that in 100 years from now, distilleries widely use Scottish oak. I mentioned 100 years because the trees take 100+ years to grow to the right size.
Yeah.
So
which is longer than American oak, as I understand it.
Correct.
American oak actually grows very fast.
Yeah, correct.
Classic Americans.
And when we analyze the different types, so when I talk about this, people always say, so tell me, what is Scottish oak? We can't really answer that question yet because we don't have thousands of trees to give a generic answer. Some of the trees are very close to European oak, so French oak, Spanish oak. Quercus robur is the Latin name that whiskey lovers will recognize. Some of them are Quercus alba, so the American type. And of course, I'm forgetting the third type, but we have come across a type of oak, which is essentially a hybrid oak, I guess, which is not the robur type or the alba type. I can't remember the name now, so you'll have to Google that one if you're listening.
But can Google it.
Yes, so going back to Swedish oak, I'm not sure what species it is, but it could be one of these two, or maybe a completely different one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, my rudimentary understanding of the difference between American oak and European oak, as American oak grows quite a lot faster, it's wide grain, whereas European oak is narrow grain, because it takes much, so it's essentially it's denser, you know. Yes. So then the aging process takes a little bit longer.
Yes,
I hope I'm not misquoting that.
For sure. I think it's the other way around. But
yeah, it might be the other way around.
I think,
so it's either that or not that. So
because I know
people can Google it.
Yeah,
one's tight and one's loose.
This is a really informative podcast.
Well, they know what the difference is. They just don't know which one is which. I've been the same for years. I know what the difference is, but I don't know which one is which.
What I can tell you is that the European oak stave are wider, and I think they're wider because the whiskey goes deeper into the wood. So that makes me think that the grain is more open.
Maybe
European oak than the American oak.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's leave it at that.
Indeed. That's something we know.
Yeah. Okay. So Sweden. Sweet. They have that box. Is it box something box?
Yes, I think they've changed the name. Though.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Box,
It
yeah.
used to be like Box Distillery,
Yeah.
just because the distillery looked like a box. I think something like that.
Yeah. I think they've had to change their name if I'm thinking of the right distillery.
Okay.
That was probably the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
No,
Ludo,
I think another distillery, McMira, was the first one. But anyway, yes.
super nice to talk to you, man. Thank you so much. What's next for you? What have you got going on?
I've got one more trip this year to Belgium, of
Yeah.
all places. We have a new partner there, so that's next week. And then Christmas is around the corner. So,
Yeah. Christmas in Elgin.
Indeed, yes.
Nice. Thank you so much, man.
Well,
Appreciate
thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.